Hello, I'm Alex Just, and welcome to the latest edition of the Institute of Employment Rights Fact News General Election vlog. Today we're going to be looking at the four remaining parties and their election manifestos for 2017. I'll be reviewing them in order, just to be fair, of the number of MPs that they currently have in Westminster. And as with our analysis of the Conservative, Labour and Lib Dem manifestos, we'll be looking to see how their policies shape up and compare to this, the IER's own Manifesto for Labour Law. So to start with, we're going to have a look at this, the SNP's manifesto. Now, obviously, the SNP have a fairly clear political objective in terms of wanting independence for Scotland, but what they have sought to do in their manifesto is to contrast some of the areas in which they've already changed policy in terms of employment and industrial relations law, and suggest ways that they think the UK government should follow their lead, as they put it, from what they've been doing in Holyrood. And one of the things which they want to do is scrap employment tribunal fees, which is something that they've already legislated for in the Scottish Parliament, but has yet to fully take effect. They've also called for an outright ban of 0 hours contracts, and they also want to introduce a real living wage as opposed to the fake living wage that we currently have, which isn't in fact linked to the Living Wage Commission, but it's a percentage between 50 and 60% of average earnings. So those are three of the big takeaways for the SNP. They've also said that they'd like to repeal the 2016 Trade Union Act. They would allow public sector unions to have check-off, whereby members could pay their subscription fees through payroll. And they're also in favour of protecting and maintaining facility time for trade union representatives in public sector workplaces. A few of the standout elements for me from this manifesto in terms of labour and employment rights were firstly the suggestion that the SNP would like to set up what they call a Fair Work Commission, which would take in unions, business representatives and members from the across the public sector to look at how workers' rights after Brexit can be protected. They've also called for equal pay audits in all companies that have 150 employees or more, and they have a number of policies in relation to gender equality, one of which is they would like there to be no separate dress codes for men and women in the workplace. They've also got a commitment to increase the percentage of women in the boardroom in both in terms of public sector organisations and an aspiration in private companies too. I was pleased to see that blacklisting features and justice for blacklisted workers features in the SNP manifesto. They've said that they want to use public procurement and contracts, which they already do, along with the Welsh Government, to stop companies convicted of blacklisting offences from being given big public sector contracts. So that was positive. And one perhaps unique policy, which doesn't feature in any of the other party manifestos that I've read so far, is that the SNP have called for a legal right for women returning to the workplace to breastfeed their children, which, given the recent controversies that we've had with some shops and some workplaces allegedly not allowing women to breastfeed, marks a sort of shift, I suppose, in that element of allowing women returning to work after they've had children to continue to breastfeed. So those are the main aspects of the SNP manifesto. Plaid Cymru have what they call an action plan. So it's a series of pledges of things that they would like to do, how they'd like to change the status quo as it is. And I picked out three things really. That their manifesto doesn't go into loads of detail on employment law, but what they have said is that they would guarantee, firstly, the rights of all EU nationals and EU citizens currently working in the UK after Brexit. They're in favour of introducing a verified living wage that would be set by an independent body. They don't specify who that is, but presumably it would be something like the Living Wage Commission, which is currently working with the Resolution Foundation to set a wage that actually reflects the cost of living, as opposed to, as we've said, the current living wage, which doesn't really do that. And they've also proposed a human rights charter for Wales, which would, in their words, attempt to ensure that all workers get rights and all members of the public are able to access the courts and to get rights, even if the government undermines the Human Rights Act. The next manifesto that we've got is from the Green Party. They've got a few different sections that deal with employment-related issues. First of all, perhaps the boldest step of any party in terms of shaking up how work and how the economy functions, the Greens are proposing investigating and piloting a universal basic income. This is something that's gained a lot of interest in academic circles recently, and it's essentially the idea that the government should ensure that everybody has a basic wage, regardless of whether they're working or not, in order to make sure that there's a safety net there that would obviously work alongside benefit systems that we already have. The Greens have also said that they'd like to try and phase in a 4-day working week, capping the number of hours that people would have to work to just 35 hours a week. And they've also promised to completely ban 0 hours contracts. They, like the Labour Party and like the SNP and like Plaid Cymru, have said that they'd like the living wage to be a genuine living wage, and they've, in the Green Manifesto, aimed for a target of £10 an hour by 2020, which is the same figure that we've already seen in the Labour Manifesto. On gender pay inequality, they make a number of recommendations on how to increase gender equality in terms of pay, and what they want is for also a minimum of 40% of all members of public companies and public sector boards to be women. So that's, again, not a lot of detail on how they would do that, but that's something that they'd like to do. Similarly to Plaid Cymru, they've said that they'd like to, the Greens, give guaranteed rights to all EU citizens who are currently in the UK after Brexit takes place. And they do stray a little bit into the world of industrial relations. There's not a lot of detail, but they have said that they'd like to revive the role of democratic trade unions. So this is a sort of broad aspiration, but without a lot of detail. So, compared again to the Manifesto for Labour Law, it's got quite clear mechanisms to increase trade union participation in the economy through things like sectoral collective bargaining, increasing the role of unions in the workplace, and the Green Manifesto doesn't have all that much to say specifically about that. There's one other policy I picked out, which is in their section on young people, and what the Greens have said here is that what they want to do is to scrap the bandings that we currently have with minimum wage legislation to allow all workers access to the living wage, so it wouldn't matter how old a worker was. And finally, this is the UKIP manifesto. It's got a few sections that deal with employment law issues. One is they refer to 0 hours contracts, and the manifesto says UKIP would like to tighten up on 0 hours contracts, and they have an aspiration to severely limit their use. There are no policy details about how they would do that. They're certainly not proposing abolishing it, or, as the Lib Dems have done, sort of suggesting that there needs to be is further consultation on how to phase them out. They have made a commitment to protect workers' rights once we've left the EU. There's no specifics in the manifesto from UKIP about what that would mean in terms of legislation. And then they've got two policies which relate to employment practices, one of which is that employers have to advertise all jobs to British citizens first before they offer them to people from overseas. And secondly, UKIP proposed that employers should be allowed to discriminate in favour of a British person under the age of 25 over a more qualified foreign applicant. So in essence there, UKIP are saying that it's perfectly okay to discriminate against somebody on the grounds of where they come from. They've not got into any specifics about how they would do this, but it would obviously mean quite significant changes to our existing framework under the Equality Act, where somebody's nationality is a protected characteristic, and an employer wouldn't be allowed to do that. That would land them in a lot of trouble. So those are the key points that we have from the manifestos from these four parties we looked at: the SNP, Plaid Cymru and the Greens, all broadly progressive parties, I suppose, who are pretty much in favour of increasing the minimum wage up to the living wage. They've all got some suggestions, all four parties, about how they want to deal with 0 hours contracts, but in different levels of specificity. The SNP probably have the most detail in terms of things like repealing the Trade Union Act, getting rid of employment fees, employment tribunal fees, but even they don't quite tackle the issue of industrial relations and how to try and get more engagement for workers in workplaces, and generally how to make Britain's economy more democratic and fairer. So that concludes the roundup of the main parties' manifestos now. If you want to watch any of the other videos, please click on the link below. You'll be able to find the Fact News vlog channel. There are also many more articles written by experts who contributed to the Manifesto for Labour Law on the Fact News Hub page. And we're going to have one final vlog post coming up this week, which will do a sort of overview and compare and contrast what the main differences are for those of you who are still considering who to vote for, so you can weigh up, at least in terms of employment and industrial relations policies, where the parties stand.